Welcome to episode 76 of Beyond Distribution with GTDC. I'm Kavita May. Our host, Frank Vitagliano, sits down with Larry Walsh, CEO and Chief Analyst at Channelnomics, to discuss the latest GTDC and Channelnomics research on the evolving role of distribution. As AI, cybersecurity, cloud, and digital platforms reshape the IT landscape, distributors are playing an increasing strategic role in helping vendors and partners meet challenging customer demands. Frank and Larry explore why distribution remains the connective tissue of the technology channel and what its future means for the entire IT ecosystem. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next edition of Beyond Distribution. I am very excited today to have back, because I know we've done this before together, Larry, but to have you back, Larry Walsh, founder, CEO of Channelnomics. Larry, welcome.
Hey, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I am particularly excited today because we are very close to finalizing, and it's pretty much final, I guess, but we haven't released it yet, and we will soon. A really, really comprehensive study on the evolving role of distribution. And when you and I first talked about developing this report, Larry, you remember the vision was talk about the idea that there's so much happening in the area of technology, innovation, and evolution that it has to have a profound impact on the IT ecosystem. And obviously, distribution is a major part of that IT ecosystem. So, as other vendors and the solution providers, et cetera. And so, therefore, what were some of the things that are happening, and what are some of the advances, evolution, call it what you want, that distributors are making to ensure that this technology lands the way it's supposed to? So that was the original idea. And of course, you took it from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, first of all, Channelnomics has partnered with GTDC now. I think, what is it now, 5 years, Frank? Maybe a little bit longer. I mean, we've been doing, but we've been doing research with, on distribution for GTDC for a number of years. And after a while, you look at it and you say, okay, well, we did this, and okay, we talked about this. And I give you credit, Frank, for giving us the challenge of, all right, well, what's happening out there, and where can we have an impact? What can we show where we have an impact? And that was the driving, the North Star, the driving premise behind what we did here. The entire idea that you're right, the market is changing rapidly. In fact, I just got done talking with an MSP who was saying is that, yeah, it changed. It is changing. It changed yesterday. It changed again today. And it's going to change every day now for the foreseeable future. That is unprecedented, not just in the technology industry, but it's unprecedented in our history. And I think that that's something to keep in mind. The customer is well aware of this, and their expectations are changing, and that means we, as the facilitators of technology adoption and usage, we have to adapt to those changes as well, and that's what this report is really about.
Yeah, that's great. So, before we get into some of the details, because there's a lot to it. There's a lot in there, and I want to go through some of it at a high level, of course, and then really encourage people to take the time to read it and understand it and leverage it, frankly. Before we do that, though, talk a little bit about, if you would, methodology. How many partners did you talk to, where, et cetera? Give us a quick overview of that.
Yeah, no, this is extensive. So the G in GTDC stands for global. So this is a global study. So we surveyed more than 460 partners from Asia, North America, Europe, Middle East. This is a cohort that we know well. We've surveyed against them a number of times already, so we know how they respond. We know what our baselines are. We supplemented that with a few dozen interviews, so that we actually understand, well, what's happening out in the world, in relative to the issues that we're talking about from a vendor perspective, as well as a distribution and a reseller or a partner perspective. And then the last piece of this was marrying it up to data on what the customers are doing. So we're looking at this, and in fairness, the customer information is an amalgamation from enterprise to SMB, but the issues will change based on the customer segment. But their concerns, their needs are very universal. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do with the next bit of technology innovation, and the scale is what really makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you start the report with, which I think is really compelling, is the overall question of what are the customer expectations, how have they changed, and are they being met, which is really a pretty fundamental question, right? And of course your premise is that they're not, without a lot of help, and that help, right, is coming from folks within the ecosystem, particularly distributors, et cetera. So I'm going to ask you to maybe expand on that a little bit. But one of the thoughts that I had behind it when I read it was how, in your opinion, based on the work you've done, because I know you talk to customers all the time, you talk to vendors, et cetera, how are the expectations changing? Were you surprised by that? And is it simply a function of, well, as technology evolves and gets more complicated and evolves more quickly and more significantly, customer expectations are going to change and be more significant, or is there something else at work here?
I think you're going to get a number of different answers. The one I'm going to point to is failure. And so if you think back, a couple of years ago at the GTDC summit in North America, your other partners, IDC, were presenting on the AI trends. So, and at the time, they were looking at this and saying, well, by 2027, it's going to be a $150 billion market. And this is, and everybody's like, you got to get in on this now. Well, the size of the AI market is well above that. And because there's been a huge amount of spending. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we are literally going to spend somewhere in the order of $3 to $5 trillion. And when we say that, this is the development of the AI infrastructure, and there's going to be pockets of on-prem that's going to be driving it. But when I say, there's a failure point that's already happened, is that the businesses rushed into AI. They had mandates from their boards to do something. And so they jumped into it. And last year, MIT came out with a study that said 95% of enterprise AI projects failed. And it's easy to see why they failed, because they went in to spend money without intent. They didn't go in looking at what can we actually leverage this for? And so that's what's driving a lot of the customer expectations changing, is that they realize that they have to retool, they have to redesign their processes, they have to reset their expectations. And they're looking not just for companies, whether it's a vendor, a solution provider, or somebody else, they're looking for companies that can help guide their businesses and then help them with the technology adoption, not give them the technology adoption and they'll figure out what to do with the business.
Yeah. And so one of the things that this report highlights is Channelnomics' view on where are the gaps in capabilities, right? And it's pretty significant, right? And so talk a little bit about that. Where are you seeing the gaps? What are some of the areas you've looked at? And what are some of the things that you're seeing today? Because obviously this conversation will become dated very quickly, because basically, as you just described, things are moving so quickly that there'll be more gaps and there'll be more, capability issues. But at least for what's contained in the report, what have you observed?
All right. So here's the one that I think everybody's going to be able to relate to, and they're going to experience it sooner or later. So at this point, everybody's heard of Mythos, the AI model that Anthropic created, Anthropic being the company behind Claude. But behind all these chatbots, there are these very sophisticated AI models and the large learning language models and the data sets behind them. Mythos was so powerful that they couldn't release it. It was going to break security. It was literally going to make some of the most prominent and sophisticated security companies irrelevant, because it just would like slice through. So the government stepped in and said, yeah, look, we need to slow this down and see what we're actually dealing with. That is just a harbinger of what's going to happen going forward, is that if you look, and we outline this in the report, we show that there are significant gaps between what the customers are looking for versus what the vendors and the channel are able to deliver organically. And anyone who looks at this, they're going to look at it and say, well, that can't be right. If you're looking at like comprehensive security, by our measure, 36% of the channel, vendors plus partners can deliver on the customer's expectations, whereas the customers have 74% of customers have this as a priority. Now, why would you have a delta like that? It's because solution providers are specialized. The generalists can't do everything. They do a lot of small things well. The specialists are very focused on the things that they do very well. The vendors are built that way too. If you look at many of the leading vendors in the market, they're not very broad-based, in terms of what they focus on. They have a common family of products and services that they deliver. And that's what's creating the gap. That's what necessitates that ecosystem effect, that we bring in multiple parties to solve for the totality of the customer need. And that's where this gap is really coming from, is that there's just not enough of the aggregation of those resources to meet the customer's expectations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so as you've gone through in the report, you've established that. And then once you've established that, you then shift to the discussion about, well, what help is out there to solve that? And clearly, both of us agree the evolving capabilities of distribution are clearly important today, but will become more important as this goes forward, based on the evolving technology and what's out there. And so one of the questions I had for you, and I've clearly been a supporter and an observer of distribution for a long time, and for the last 5 or 6 years, I'm in it more than just as an observer. But so have you, and you've been in it and observing from a little bit different perspective. And so my question is, we've seen distribution capabilities expand over the years, and we can go through the whole dialogue of banks and warehouses to what they are today. But is it happening faster, and is it more profound than it's been before? Because it really seems to me we're seeing dramatic shifts here, and if so, why?
Yeah. So when you look at, I've been hanging around distribution for most of the time I've been in the channel. If you go back and you find the photos, you can see I used to have hair color. Yeah. But yeah. That's good. Yeah. Here's the thing: is that the distributors have always provided value-add services, and it's really difficult for me even to think about making a distinction between a broadline volume-based distributor versus a specialty or a value-add distributor. I mean, to me, they all do many of these same functions, and they have for a long time. Do you take advantage of them? Do you even know that they exist? And I remember, I've had this conversation with many people inside of distribution. One that always comes to mind with Kirk Robinson when he was running North America at Ingram Micro. He would always say the most painful question, or the most painful thing that he would hear from anyone, whether it was a vendor or a solution provider, was, "I didn't know you did that." And there's such an immense amount of resources that are available through distribution. Now, and when I say available to augment the go-to-market capabilities of both vendors and the solution providers. Now, what have we seen over the past couple of years? Well, there's been a lot of questions about, well, what's going to happen to distribution in the future in a cloud-based, services-based, software-based world where there are no boxes to pick, pack, and ship. So not that they were in that business still in a meaningful way, but people still think of them that way. And the distributors have done a fantastic job of investing in next generation capabilities. The entire conversation that you and I have frequently, Frank, about the development of these sales platforms. So if you Ingram, Tech Data, D&H, Arrow, they all have them. With distributors, distributors around the world have them as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a sign that distribution saw that there was a threat to their model and that they had to evolve. And that has only lifted up the value of those capabilities that have always been endemic to their models.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the interesting thing is, and one of the really compelling charts that you have in the study is the one where it's called evolving distribution capabilities, but you show where you think it is today, right? Or where it is today, frankly. And then as you look out 5 years, where you think it's going to go based on the evolving technology as best as you could kind of see it,
Yeah.
sitting, because we both know that 5 years from now we'll look back at it and there'll be stuff that happens that you just couldn't anticipate. But that, to me, that's really, really interesting, because it really begins to show that the investments that are being made are now tied to the technology innovations and the requirements of the customer that tie back to aren't being met by the solution provider or the vendor by themselves. And
Right.
therefore, we have to use that term that I know you don't like, which is IT ecosystem, right? But it matters and it makes sense.
Yes, I mean, look, I have been that guy who said, "Oh, ecosystems," and I've had to explain myself many times on this. It's not that I dislike the word, nor do I dislike the model. I just dislike people talking about it and not doing it.
Yeah.
And there's good reasons for it. So here's the thing about solution providers. I've had this conversation with many of them. They do think about their customers. They think about, how do I work with my customer? How do I make myself successful with them? Now, I think that some of that value and mindset has to evolve a bit more, but yeah, they are focused on that. Your vendor sales rep is focused on the quarter. They're focused on their number. Yeah. And that drives the unnatural behavior or the friction that causes ecosystems not to work. The distributor or any distributor really is a natural aggregation point. So if you look at, if I'm a integrator and I need to pull together a dozen different vendors to create an integrated system that will meet my customers' needs, am I going to go and cherry pick them on my own? Or am I going to go to work with one of my distributors who already has those relationships, already has the pricing, already has the technical support that I need to make sure that I'm doing the configurations correctly, and then helping to do the staging and the rollout? To me, as a solution provider, that is a more advantageous route. And in fact, the solution providers have told us that's what they prefer. Yeah. Whereas the vendors are the ones that don't always see that, and they don't always have an appreciation for it. And I think that that's the thing that we're really trying to get across with this reporting, is that distribution is not a sunk cost. It is not a loss leader. It is not a tax. It is actually a driver of value if you know where to go to extract the resources to do it well.
Yeah, exactly. And that then leads to, the next discussion and the next sort of phase of the report that you did, which was the chart called Economics of Distribution, right? And as you know, you and I've tackled this one a couple of times together, right? And it's continually been tackled. It was easier to tackle it back in the day when it was just hardware oriented, right?
Right.
You can measure it much easier. Now it's so much more complicated with the advent of SaaS and cloud and all the other things that are part of it. AI will soon be there also. And people want a silver bullet and would like you to pin a dollar amount exactly to each of the elements. And it, as you know, and I know, it's so hard to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you've done in this report is you've laid out the things that people have to think about as it relates to, is distribution cost or is it cost avoidance, right?
Mm.
And what should you be thinking about as it relates to? And so there's 6, 7, 8, 10 items in here that are very succinct, very net, but vendors have to be thinking about them as it relates to building a go-to-market strategy. And I thought that was a really important part of what you built in here.
Well, look, I think that, again, when I'm having conversations with vendors about distribution, and this is one of the things that vendors come to Channelnomics for, is to optimize their distribution landscapes. And they always think that they're oversubscribed. They have too many distributors. They're paying out too much. And I always love hearing the question, like, well, what did the distributor do to deserve this? I'm like going, why? You're paying for a service. Ultimately, a distributor is providing services. And so anything you're paying them is not like you're paying a sales rep. They're actually doing things that you're not good at. Yeah. And one of the things that we've done, so with the distribution finance workshops that we run with GTDC, as well as the reporting here, we've quantified this, is that depending on which function you're tapping into, you can get a 3.5x to an 8.5x return on that investment from from working with the distributor. So these different functions actually do have accretive value. They're not a lost cost or a sunk cost. But more importantly, it's about efficiency. Yeah. So if you can go to market with a greater level with a greater probability of success, and not just a little one. In some cases, you're looking at 2.5 to 3 times greater probability rate of being successful working with the distributor than trying to go it alone. Why would you want to go it alone? Yeah. And I think that gets overlooked too often, because there's I don't want to overstate this, because I don't want this to come across as being disrespectful or insulting, because look, we all have our biases, but there are still a number of vendors that believe that they're the best at everything, and you know what? In some cases they are, but nobody is the best at everything, and that's where we make choices that are to our benefit.
Well, yeah, and that coupled with the fact that. Everybody nowadays wants to talk about business outcomes, right? That's mm-hmm. the new buzzword that everybody's on, and frankly should be on, but I'm not sure it should be a buzzword, because it's something that we should have been thinking about for the last 25 years, right? But so be that as it may, any business outcome / solution / satisfied customer experience typically involves and includes multiple vendor products included in it. Everybody has their version of what that number is. The last studies I've seen say somewhere between 6 and 7, 6 to 8, somewhere in that range, right? Well, when you think about that, to your point, of course the vendors, and having worked for the vendor world for 40 years, I have the utmost respect for what they do, their ability to deliver game-changing products on a consistent basis and help customers. But to your point, none of it's done in a vacuum. It's all part of a broader solution that's inclusive of a lot of other things, including services support and technical support and those types of things that tend to get overlooked in the conversation. But you highlighted a lot of them in this report and explain what they are and why they're valuable. I think that's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, look at it like this. It ultimately, look, everybody's getting measured on performance. So the average vendor is spending anywhere between 5 and 8% of their revenue on channels. So if they're not fully channelized, then that's the ratio for the portion that's indirect. If they're 100% channel, then that's total revenue. For that, though, they need to get somewhere between a 15 to 20x return. So if I'm going to spend $1 on the channel, I need to get $20 back. And I need to make sure that that $20 is profitable. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to look for the most efficient means of doing that. Well, going through the channel is a means of efficiency. It defers cost. It also has a lower cost of sale. Working with distributors do the same thing. If you can pull a distributor in to do some of your channel marketing, to do some of your onboarding, to do some of your training, or doing the technical support, that's, it may cost you $1, but that it's not costing you the $2, $3, $4 if you had to do it yourself and had to do it at scale.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we have to continuously remind people is that distribution is not there to to siphon off precious budget. They're there to help ensure that that budget does not balloon. That's one of their core functions.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but I think it necessitates repeating is as a vendor, and I lived this world for a long time, there was constant discussion about rationalizing the channel and my channel costs, and do I have the right folks in the right areas doing the right things, and people are consistently looking at that. And I do think now more than ever, that is becoming a major part of it. And, folks have had this discussion for years about, how many distributors, what's the right answer? How many should I have? How many shouldn't I have? What should I be thinking about? How can I manage them effectively to get the return that you just described? And I think that's a really important discussion point. And I think this report, if I was utilizing this report as a channel chief, back when I was running around as a channel chief, I would have found it very helpful, right? Because there are things in here that I inherently kind of knew, but they weren't articulated or laid out in a way that helped me explain them and further understand them. So I think that's a big part of it. And the advantage I think that you have your company has to a large degree, and to some degree I do too, is when you're not in the fray every day, you're not in the constant, cadence calls and customer discussions, and then you can step back and think about it a little bit and look at it and then have it laid out in a format that is understandable and usable. I think that becomes very helpful. And I think that's an advantage that, based on the work that you're doing with your clients, I think that's what you're seeing here.
Well, look, there's always going to be doubters.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people who doubt the value of the channel, the viability of the channel. Just as they ask questions. Well, what did a distributor do to earn this? Well, they ask that about partners every day. And there's always going to be somebody that comes along. I was just having this conversation with a couple of channel chiefs yesterday. It's like going, yeah, that time the partner actually comes in with that $5 million, $10 million deal, and somebody will say, well, we can't pay them that.
Exactly.
Right. So they're going to have to take a haircut on this one. Right. Okay. So yeah, having information like this is the reason why we do this, is that even if you look at it and say, just as you said, oh, I knew that, or I kind of knew that, yeah, the vibe is there. This from experience and being around, and people have talked about it anecdotally. But for the doubters, here's evidence.
Yeah.
This is what this is actually looking like. So if you can still maintain your doubts, but now you have something that you should really be thinking about to make sure that you're going to make the right decisions.
Yeah, no, I totally. We got a couple of minutes, so kind of in closing, what I would say is that people continually ask me, well, what's the role of GTDC, right? Why does GTD exist? And what I've said since the beginning is it's really simple. Our goal, our mission is to educate the IT ecosystem, but primarily the vendor community, on what distributors do, and therefore, once you understand that, the value of why they exist becomes very obvious, very apparent. And to be honest with you, and I've been saying this really since I took the job in 2019, is they've made it easy for me to have these conversations, because since then, and right from the pandemic right on through, they've done nothing but increase capabilities and become more valuable. And my goal is to be able to effectively articulate that without it sounding like I'm doing it because it's my job, right? And that's why people like you and what you do at Channelnomics is really helpful, because you're able to do that in a way that takes into account what you're hearing every day in the street, because you're talking to people that are out there every day in the street. So kind of in closing, what are your kind of final thoughts regarding where we are relative to the evolution of the space, the technology, where distributors are, and some of kind of your final thoughts on this report and why people ought to be paying attention.
First of all, I want to say that yes, that is your job to be the advocate for distribution. It's not self-serving if it's true, and I think that that's the thing is that if I would not publish something or even say something that if I didn't believe it, if I didn't have the evidence to back it up. And so I think that that's the role that you and GTDC and Channelnomics are playing here. If it changes, it changes, and then we'll deal with that. But as you look forward, last year, or year before, somebody published a thing saying that AWS was now a top 5 distributor, and the marketplaces and the hyperscalers are going to displace distribution. And I looked at that and I just laughed. And there's a lot of truth to the growth of hyperscalers and marketplaces. In fact, the trend line is that the customers already prefer sourcing through them. They want to do more. It's going to become the majority by the end of the decade. That doesn't displace distribution. AWS does not do the things that an Ingram or a TDS or TD Synnex or Arrow, they just don't have those breadth of capabilities and those support resources. Both the legacy ones as well as the ones that are evolving. Now, there's things you can learn from them, of course, but no, distribution's not going to go away. Distribution is going to serve a vital role. And I think that what we are showing here collectively is that there is good reason to look to distribution rather than thinking in a separate direction that it will all, going on your own or just trying to do it with a handful of partners. No, distribution is the glue that can hold all this together.
Yeah, exactly. Very well said. And I couldn't agree more. In fact, if anything, the collaboration that we've seen between and among the distributors and the hyperscalers over the past 4 or 5 years, even though there's, to your point, a little bit of competition there's some maybe easy product sales that have been transitioned over to an AWS marketplace, and that's fine. But not only they can't do it, there's a lot of function they don't want to do, right? Because these are things that have been built up in distribution land for 40 years at scale that require more than the investments that I think they want to make or are willing to make. And by the way, the realization is out there that it can all coexist because it's all part of the ecosystem. And that's what we're starting to see. So yeah. I think that's really important. Well, Larry, I couldn't be happier with the results of this report. The marketplace will have it soon. We'll have it released and folks will see it and we'll make sure we publicize it and do all the things we need to make sure people see it and understand it. But thank you for what you and your team at Channelnomics does, not only on behalf of us at GTDC, but the entire industry.
Thank you, Frank. I really appreciate it.